Good morning. My name is Hannah, and welcome to our Enquire webinar on for foster carers on understanding additional support at school. We're really delighted by how many of you can join us this morning. My name is Hannah, as I've said, and I am a Senior Advice and Information Officer at Enquire. I've been at Enquire for over 7 years. Previous to that, I worked with the Scottish Government in education policy. Previous to that, I worked with young adults with additional support needs, and previous to that, I was actually a young person with a lot of additional support needs and did most of my education in hospital. And I'm here with my colleague Lisa, who's going to present.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, I'm Lisa, and I'm the Advice and Information Officer at Enquire. I've worked at Enquire since last year. Before that, I worked in various roles, my most recent being a distress brief intervention coordinator at Support in Mind Scotland. My youngest brother has autism, so I've seen the effects and difficulties that it can have on children and young people when they have additional needs and the problems that can come up in school. But I've also seen the difference that support can make in school.
Thank you, Lisa. We also have our comms colleague, Mohit, who's in the background. So we'll be mentioning some links and things, so he will be sharing them with ourselves as we go through the presentation. So I'm going to start with a wee plan about today and then pass on to Lisa to give the kind of main bit of information. So firstly, hopefully we've arrived at this session today, you've heard about us, but before we go any further, I just wanted to explain a wee bit about Enquire. So we are the Scottish Advice Service for Additional Support for Learning, and we've existed for more than 20 years. We're funded by the Scottish Government to provide independent advice and information to children, young people, parents, carers and professionals about children's rights and the legislation and guidance. And as this slide says, our vision is that all children in Scotland are supported, included and listened to throughout their education. Now, how we do this is we have our one-to-one helpline advice through phone, email, our web form and web chat. We also have lots of information and resources through our website, www.enquire.org.uk, and our young people's website, reach.scot. And we also do sessions like this for outreach to reach other families and through our social media. Now, we do all this with the goal of helping parents, carers, professionals and young people feel more listened to and supported, feel more confident in taking action, understand rights and responsibilities, know what steps to take, and hopefully know if you need it, where you can find more help and information. Now, before we get going, I just wanted to cover a note about the language we'll use in this session. So we understand there is loads of terminology around foster caring and children who are care experienced. So I just wanted to explain the language we use because it kind of moves around a wee bit. All the language we use comes from the recommendations of the report done by the independent care review called The Promise, which listened to the experience of more than 5,500 children, care experienced adults, families and carers. So as I'm sure a lot of you will be aware, a child is care experienced if they're living or have lived in care at any stage of their life. This includes children who have experienced or are currently living in residential care, foster care, kinship care, or at home with a supervision order. Adopted children who were previously looked after are also care experienced. Now, in this session, we'll also use the term looked after, as this is a legal term, which means the local authority is currently legally responsible for a child's care. Children and young people can be looked after at home or away from home. Some of the laws around education specifically talk about looked after children, so that's when we'll use that terminology. It's also really important to know for yourselves today that in education law, parents refers to anyone who cares for a child, and that includes foster carers and kinship carers. So some of the resources we're going to share with you today will talk about parents, and we want to make it clear that this includes yourselves. It's also worth adding that throughout this presentation and a lot of our resources, we talk about your child, which means the child that you are looking after in whichever way that might be. And right, so the aims of the session today, I'm sure there is a real mix of families in this virtual room. Some of you may have children you're caring for who are in the early years, between primary and secondary, at school leaving age. And although all your children are care experienced, they will have a variety of different needs. So our plan for today is that Lisa is going to give you a run through the key rights and duties around additional support for learning. And we're also going to cover within that a lot of the kind of key issues we hear about and information that foster carers we find tend to come to our helpline about. This should take around 15-20 minutes, and then we're going to try and protect as much time as possible to answer some of your direct questions. At the bottom of the slides, you'll see the names of some of our web pages where you can get more information. For those of you attending in person, so not watching the recorded event, Mohit's going to link to these, but they should also be easy to find on our website. So we will send you an email with the slides if you do need a bit more information. Now, yes, with this in mind, as you're going through the session, if you want to submit any of your questions, you're very welcome. Please do post your questions in the Zoom chat, but as I mentioned before, just to respect everyone's privacy by avoiding naming your child's school or any teachers. And when we're answering, we will tend not to use your name, just so that we can protect that privacy for when the event's being recorded. If possible, if you can put your questions to the whole group rather than just to me or Lisa. Sometimes people do it and it can be quite hard for us to find them. We will try and get through as many of your questions as we can. It might be that we bunch some of the questions together if they're really similar, or it might be that the question's really specific and other families might not relate to. We might suggest that you contact our helpline, which you're always welcome to do as well following this session. Right, I will now pass on to Lisa.
Thanks, Hannah. So today we're mostly going to focus on additional support for learning rights, but it's important to remember that your child is protected by other legislation too. First of all children over 3 are entitled to funding hours of early learning and childcare. In these funded hours, they're entitled to the additional support that we'll be talking about today. It may also be useful to know that disabled children under 3 may also be able to access support, but there's more about this on our website. So when a child is of school age, which is from the age of 5 until they turn 16, they have an individual right to an education. It's important to say here that although school age is up to 16 years old, if your child is at school, they then have the right to stay on at that school for their senior years if they would like to. It's also worth noting that disabled children are protected by the Equality Act 2010. This act means that schools and local authorities have a duty not to discriminate against anyone because of protected characteristics. So this includes disability, but also race, gender, and others. This act also means that schools have a duty to provide reasonable adjustments. So this means changes to practice or policies to ensure that disabled children can fully access their learning. Again, there's much more about this on our website. Also, it's worth mentioning the UNCRC, which sets out a number of ways children should be treated. This isn't fully in Scottish law yet, but it will be soon. And lastly, children aged 12 to 15 have particular rights to be involved in decisions about their learning and support. Enquire works as part of My Rights, My Say, which supports young people to have their views heard, whether that's by informing them of their rights, which is what we at Enquire do, or getting support from an advocate, which another organisation, Partners in Advocacy, provide. So we know often that parents and carers can feel like their views are not being listened to or taken seriously, but it's important to understand that you do have rights, and as a foster carer, these rights apply to you. You'll have expert knowledge about your child, and so you should be involved in decisions and discussions about their additional support. So you have the right to share your views about your child's support needs and have your views taken into account. You can have a supporter or advocate present at meetings about your child's support, and you can ask for an assessment of your child's needs. You may wish to do this if you feel your child's needs haven't been identified or if they've changed. You can also ask for a specific type of assessment if necessary, for example, mental health. If it's not already been done or circumstances have changed, you can ask for an assessment for a coordinated support plan or a CSP, but we'll explain more about CSPs later. And you also have the right to make a request to place your child in a different school. A child or young person may have several people involved in their decisions about their education, for example, their birth parents and current foster carers. If there's any disagreement about the support your child needs, the local authority should then listen to all views, including your child's views, and make decisions based on their best interests. Okay, so the focus today is on additional support for learning and what that means for your children. So let's begin by what we mean by additional support needs. A child has additional support needs when, for whatever reason, they can't benefit from school education without extra help. This means a child does not need a diagnosis to be entitled to support. So a child can be considered to have additional support needs for any number of reasons. They may have behavioural difficulties, learning difficulties, or English could be their second language, or they may be experiencing bullying, or be a young carer, be highly able, or be care experienced. It's also important to remember that multiple issues might be affecting your child at the same time, but really it's all about your child's individual needs, their situation, and the impact it's having on their learning. Additional needs can also be long-term or short-term. For you as foster carers, it's important to know that if your child is currently looked after by a local authority, then they are automatically assumed to have additional support needs. That is, unless they're assessed and it's decided that they don't have additional support needs. This is because there's evidence that looked after children and young people can experience significant difficulties, which can affect their education. They can benefit from tailored support to help them develop to the best of their abilities. So, once we understand a child has additional support needs, it helps to know what the law says about how we should be supported. So in a nutshell, it says additional support for learning should help your child reach their full potential at school. Local authorities must support children with additional needs by identifying their needs, providing adequate and efficient support for learning, and by keeping this support under review. I'm going to explain more about what each of these mean. But first, we know particularly for you as foster carers, you may be looking after children who have been placed with you from a different area. So you may be wondering who we mean by local authority. So the law says that these duties are the responsibility of the child's home local authority. And I've got a slide that explains what's meant by this. So your child's home authority have responsibility for your child's education and their support. So this means the local authority who officially look after your child. This is true even if your child goes to a school in a different authority. The most common example of this that we hear on our helpline is that a child is attending school in the authority where they now live with their foster parents. Sometimes this is referred to as a host authority. In these situations, what's important is that the two authorities are in communication and agreement with each other about how the relationship will work. Ultimately, the responsibility still remains with the home authority, but it might be agreed, for example, that a school closer to the foster carers is a more appropriate place for the child to attend. Okay, so now we know who is who, let's get back to what the local authority should be doing. Firstly, as I mentioned, the local authority, normally through your child's school, has a duty to identify your child's needs so that they can provide the right support. Identifying needs should be an ongoing process and not a one-off activity. Teachers and support staff should be looking at your child's development and progress throughout the year. They should also take into account any information you as parents or carers can provide. In some cases, more in-depth assessments may be done by school staff, for example, for dyslexia. Other assessments may involve professionals such as educational psychologists or CAMs. Most of the time, families and schools work together to agree the assessments, but you as carers do also have a right to formally ask for an assessment for your child. Okay, so your child's needs are identified, but how does support get implemented? So the law says that all children should have some form of personal learning planning. Planning should be ongoing and kept under review. Families and young people, as we've said, have a right to be involved in these decisions. Plans might not be written, they might be informal. So for example, notes of meetings or just verbal agreements or something in more detail. But the important thing is that support should be planned. So we often advise carers not to focus on the name of the plan, but that you and the school have an agreement of your child's needs, how they will be met, and agree on targets or goals and review dates. So often support will be formally recorded into some kind of written plan. Particularly for care experienced children, there are a few types of plans that might help to be aware of. So if your child is looked after, they must have a plan prepared for them that sets out who will support their care, health and education needs. These plans often set out contact arrangements with their birth parents and siblings. At school or nursery, your child may have a learning support plan, or a plan that focuses on addressing their well-being needs, or both. Different local authorities use different names for these types of plans. So you can ask your child's school or nursery whether they have one in place, and the school should be able to tell you what types of plans are in your area and which one would suit your child's needs best. If you think it might help to have one in place, you can then ask the school to put one in place. Coordinated support plans, or CSPs, are for pupils with complex or multiple support needs who require significant support from education and at least one other agency, for example, social work or healthcare professionals. The CSP aims to help all professionals from different agencies work together to make sure the child has the support they need with their learning. CSPs are legal documents, and local authorities must open a CSP for all pupils who meet the criteria for one. Local authorities must assess all looked after children and young people who have additional support needs to find out if they should have a CSP. You can ask your child's school or nursery if they have a CSP, and if they don't, but you feel that they should, you can ask the local authority to assess your child for one. So, what can support look like? Additional support for learning should help your child reach their full potential at school. The law doesn't say exactly how children or young people should be supported, but this means that your child's needs should be met in ways that work for them and their individual needs. So we've put some examples up here, but it's important to remember this isn't an exhaustive list. So you and your child's school should work together to find the ways that suit your child best. It might be a combination of supports needed, or that different supports needed in different subjects. Remember that your child's support should be kept under review. So if your child's needs change, then their support might need to change too. So a lot of the advice and information we offer is not just about legal framework, but it's also about ways in which families can work in partnership with schools. There are lots of things that you can do to help build a positive relationship with your child's school, to help ensure they get the support they need, such as you could provide information about your child's needs, their likes, their dislikes, their strengths. You can also provide any information that you have from previous placements or schools that you feel would be helpful to share. And at a meeting with the school, you could ask to speak first, just to get the opportunity to have your say, and try to start with something positive. For example, thank you for arranging this meeting. If your child's not going to attend the meeting with the school, you can ask them what they would like to say to the people at the meeting, and then ask for this information to be shared with your child's teachers if your child's happy for this to happen. If you know an important member of staff can't attend a meeting, ask if they can put something in writing that can be shared at or before the meeting. You could also prepare for meetings, so jot down issues you want to cover in the meetings, or you could even email the school in advance with your concerns so that they can prepare for the meeting. You could ask for minutes of the meetings or for agreed actions to be written down and sent to you. But remember that you can also take someone with you to the meeting to support you. And finally, it can be helpful to keep a record of when you've contacted the school. So if you feel your child's not receiving the support they need, there's a number of options you can consider. So you could ask for a meeting with the school. This is usually with the head of additional support for learning. If your child doesn't have one already, you can ask for a learning plan or a review of their current plan. And if you feel no further forward after having the meeting, you can then put your concerns in writing to the head teacher. And if after this step you still feel no further forward, you can contact the local authority to raise your concerns. You can find contacts of all the local authorities on our website. Excuse me. There are then lots of further steps you can take. However, we always recommend starting with the school, and we have more information about further steps on our website. Okay, back to you, Hannah.
Fantastic, thank you. So hopefully, I know that was quite a quick run through for people. It's been quite quiet on the chat, so if you do have any questions, do feel free to start asking them now, but we do have a few prepared for if everyone's feeling a little bit quiet at the moment. So I can maybe start talking a little bit about one of the kind of common questions that we hear about, but please feel free just doing that while we hopefully get some of your individual questions. So the first subject I was thinking might be quite useful to have a bit of a chat about, Lisa, is for when young people are struggling to attend school. So that's something we quite commonly hear about on the helpline for care experienced young people, or for generally young people with additional support needs, where they might be experiencing anxiety related absence, or they may, I'm just having a sudden thought, I hope I haven't seen any comments from anyone else, and I'm having a little worry about whether our comment system is working for everyone. It would be helpful if someone can pop in a comment. I assume it's working, that we've had a new setting. Suddenly had a worry there, but hopefully you're all just listening avidly. So great. Oh, thank you, Eleanor. Oh. I was having a fear there, but thanks. Fiona, I've just seen that you've come in to say confirm when a child reaches their 5th year, additional support seems to disappear. Is this against the law? So certainly if a young person, so I assume you mean their 5th year of high school. So while a young person remains at school, they have the same right to support as they do from when they're at school. So all the legislation that Lisa's already covered applies. It is sometimes that the way support delivered is changed each year to sort of support and progress the young person that you're looking after towards that next destination. But if they are still in school, their support needs haven't changed between S4 and S5, and absolutely they still have a right to support. And if support seems to be disappearing or has been removed, then absolutely what I kind of suggest is starting with, well, you know, my child's needs haven't changed since S4. Can we have a conversation about what their needs are and what we all understand they are and how they're going to be supported? So kind of having a bit of a kind of reset meeting, and often actually kind of sitting down and talking about a plan and breaking apart that question of, well, you know, they haven't changed as a young person since they moved a year, so how else can they be supported? I hope that that covers. We have quite a helpful webpage on, if you look in our section on moving schools or changing schools, which is all about the rights of 16-year-olds to continue with additional support, and has some good suggested questions there to start with. So hopefully that is useful. I can see suddenly everyone's got a few questions coming. Lisa, can you see another one that would be helpful for me to answer?
Yeah, so we've got one saying here, is there any advice of what we should be asking for before starting high school, so planning for the move up to high school?
Okay, so for the move up to high school, probably the first thing to know, there is so much to cover in this, we didn't go into a huge amount of detail, is that firstly that there's transition planning duties that are put on local authorities, normally through the school. And that means at least 12 months in advance, if your young person has additional support needs, planning should start with gathering information about their needs from you, from the young person, from any agencies involved. And then at 6 months, a plan should be put together. So probably the first thing is to be asking, you know, you have a right to ask in advance, I'd say. You know, if you know that they're starting at 12 months, then it's reasonable to be beginning that conversation as soon as possible around, you know, what's happening next year, what do we need to do to support the young person I'm caring for to get ready for that move. And then I think the main things would be asked are some transition planning meetings. So either with, if there's already a quite specific school in mind, asking for that school to attend, and possibly the person responsible for additional support at your child's current school and at the school they're moving to, asking for that meeting to talk about the current support plan that's in place and how that can be transferred, and really kind of looking at what the individual needs are for your child. So although the environment might look different, how can those needs still be supported? Is there anything more I think to add on that, Lisa? We have a section on moving to high school on our website, which might also be quite a helpful one to look at. It kind of sets out some questions you could be asking and what steps you could take around that.
Yeah, no, that section of our website is good, and it's got the fact sheet for school placements as well, which can be really useful, that you're talking about. We've got another question here saying, how do we deal with schools that cannot offer placements for additional needs placements? So I'm not sure.
I'm not sure exactly. Additional needs placements cannot offer placements for children with additional needs. I'm not quite sure what the question means by that. I suppose I don't know if that's the their school isn't. I'm trying to think how that might work. It might be that they're going to clarify. I'll maybe come back to the one if you want to clarify. I'm not exactly sure whether you mean that they're not offering a placement to your child, don't say they have any space for your child, or that you feel that your child should be at an additional needs placement and one isn't being offered. If you could come back, because there's probably a few different ways we could go with that answer, but if you want to clarify that, we'll certainly come back to that question.
Okay, so I have another one here. A child who is on an adapted timetable which is not working for them, and they don't have a nurtured room at present, which I'm assuming is something that they're hoping for that could help, and they're just struggling with the way forward. So it looks like the only option the school has given or is working are trying to work with just now is an adapted timetable, but that's not working for the child.
That sounds really frustrating, this situation. So firstly, I think the thing is that you and your child are experts in their needs. I think if there's an adapted timetable that's not working, the first and foremost thing I would be saying is kind of to be going back to the school, if there is any plans in place, coming along with those plans and asking for a review of that support, and setting out, as I've kind of already said, that basic of, well, what do we all agree my son's needs are? How does this support, how do the school feel, and what evidence do they have that this support is working for them? So, you mentioned about the nurture room, what are the reasons why you think a nurture room would be of more benefit to them? And actually, if, what's the goals of this adapted timetable? So, the law doesn't say exactly what support looks like, but it should be based on that child's individual needs. So just because your son, other pupils maybe adapted timetables of work, but actually asking the school, well, why do we think this is the support measure that can meet my child's needs? And also because he's 13, what is his views, what's his experiences? That might be where the service that Lisa mentioned before, My Rights, My Say, if it would be helpful there, they provide advocacy to actually hear his views on why that timetable might not be working for him. And if it continues not to move, so I'd always suggest starting with that conversation with either the head of year or the head of additional support, and having that sit down conversation. Well, what do you understand his needs are? What do I understand? What does any other professionals involved, and why does this support feel like the one that can meet his needs? If you can't agree a way forward, then that's when, as Lisa mentioned, there are further steps you can take. We always suggest going back to the school, but if that continues not to move, then going to your local authority and saying, how, basically the similar questions of how do you feel you can meet my son's needs, this is his needs, and this is the support in place. And you can escalate kind of beyond that, but often we find kind of going back with that question of what's the evidence behind the support and how is it meeting the goals, can be enough to kind of get things moving. I hope that is helpful. I can see, I'm conscious that there's a few more questions coming in. What else?
So we've had a question back about the placements question.
Oh yeah.
We've had some confusion over. So they said, sorry, it's offering placements to children with additional needs. So going back to
Okay, so the issue is that there's a school that's not offering placements with additional needs. I suppose that comes down to, I suppose, that, you know, the first question is, I suppose there's a few different things, you know, that the local authority that's responsible for your child, they have a duty to identify your child's needs and offer them a school placement that meets those needs. And I suppose with that, you know, it's the school's duty. So there's a presumption of mainstreaming, which means if they should be meeting young people's needs within the mainstream environment. So in general, it shouldn't be that it's the school that is responsible at that level for saying yes or no to young people with additional support needs. It would be about where's the appropriate placement for them. And if an individual school was, I suppose there's also kind of question about kind of equality and discrimination there, if there's kind of a specific reason they're refusing children with additional support needs placements. But what that probably is about having a conversation with the local authority at level, if there's a particular school that you would feel would be most benefit to your child, firstly going back to the council and saying, you know, these are the reasons why we feel this meets their needs. And if you can't agree the way forward, as Lisa mentioned, there is an option to make a parental placing request that you would have to that specific school. Oh, I think we've got some background audio happening there. I can hear that.
Someone's
No worries.
Back
on. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, but I hope that answers enough of the question.
Yeah, and that sort of links into another question that's been asked about saying when the nursery are looking for a deferral for a year, but you feel that your child would be better at a ASN school supported due to some of their issues. So they don't necessarily agree with the nursery wanting to defer the child, and they feel that an ASN school would be better suited.
So I guess Lisa mentioned, so certainly, you know, the part of that pulling together that picture about your child's needs is you should be involved in that decision and your views heard. If the nursery are of that view and you're not kind of able to agree things forward, I suppose the next step would normally be kind of the local authority level around that conversation, to be setting out that, you know, can we have a conversation about the joint understanding of my child's needs, and that means not just the nursery, but the other people involved in my child's needs and how I feel about them, and then based on that, how is this decision being made to defer entry? If you're kind of stuck at nursery level, the step above that would be certainly to go to the local authority about that conversation. If your child has a CSP, that would also be, you know, you could always request a kind of review of the CSP. Hopefully that should be happening at that point. And then if things continue not to move forward, you know, you can't come to agreement with sort of someone at local authority level about the right placement for your child, then you have the option of kind of challenging that decision internally. So kind of making complaints, requesting what we call mediation. So there's a few routes in the kind of information Lisa shared. But you also could make a placing request again to to a specialist nursery provision or a special school or a mainstream school. There's just sometimes a bit of challenge around kind of paying for transport if you do go down that route. But it gets quite complicated, but there's a lot of information that sets it all really out clearly if you do want to go to that route. But I think probably the first thing would be kind of going to the nursery and asking their reasons why, and then going to the council. It's also got, you know, I think important in that question is also kind of inclusion and sort of your child's support and involvement with their peers. You know, deferring a year might be right for some young people, but it should be based on your child's best interests and not just sort of an academic, or what the law also says is cost shouldn't be a primary consideration. So it should be about your child's individual needs first, rather than just we don't know where to send them, or there's been a failure around transition planning.
Thanks, Anna. There's another question here. I'm not sure whether it's the words I got mixed up here. It says we live rural. He does have a CSP. I'm wondering if that means does he have a CSP? So it's just to confirm that.
I think it might be that might be from the 13 adapted timetable, right, which is not working for him. So the other thing, if I suppose it's difficult. It can be a difficult situation when things are rural because there's just that challenge around access, to support. but the conversation is, your child's still struggling, they still have those needs. My rights, my say, and things like that can still get involved, even if it's remotely. But I think if your child has a CSP, that's quite a powerful right around questioning. If you don't agree with the support that's in the CSP, for example, everyone's written that there's going to be this adapted timetable, that should be in the CSP. And if you don't agree with that, what you can ask for it is to be reviewed. And you do have the right to kind of challenge that to a tribunal if you were to continue to disagree with the contents of a CSP. I mean, hopefully it wouldn't reach that stage. Obviously, we all know it's easier if you don't have to go down the formal routes, but that would be, it might be that actually asking for a CSP review would be quite a helpful route in that circumstance, because it would give you that chance to have a big conversation about what's going on.
We have a comment here that someone's actually replied to saying that they're in the same situation. So I'm just going to read that one out just now, if that's okay, Hannah. So a child was given a PSA of 25 hours. However, after this whole year, we've identified that the PSA is never actually with them at all or in the area. And this has caused their child to be very distressed and break down in the relationship with the school, with myself. So social work and school staff, and after many education meetings and frustrations, so yeah, they're feeling really frustrated with the situation, and at the point now that the child's in P5 and they're worrying, thinking that they may need to move schools, but they're worried about the impact on the child. So they're looking at where they could get advice and support on the types of support the school could put in place, and ensuring that they follow the plan. And this is not all lip service or box ticking. So yeah, it sounds like it's been a lot of feeling frustrated, feeling let down, trying to get things in place, and then finding out that that's not actually happening and things are just getting a bit worse. So yeah, and someone else said that they're very frustrated, feeling that they're in the same situation. And that is really frustrating.
And really, I think particularly as Lisa said, is so frustrating when you think there is support in place, and then at the end of the year you get to this point and that's not what has been evident. So there's a few different things within that. So firstly, about kind of the 25 hours of PSA support. So as I think Lisa mentioned in the law, one of the kind of the pluses, because it's about your child's individual needs, but the challenge is the law doesn't say exactly what support looks like. So it doesn't say a young person who has care experience is entitled to 25 hours or this type of support. It is all about your child's individual needs. So some of that means we have a few pages on our website that list the different types of support that can be offered, but that's not an exhaustive list. Basically, the support, it should be about you, your child, the professionals involved, and if they're struggling, other professionals, them seeking advice and assessments from, to come up with a picture of ways that support can be provided. So this does mean that there's some flexibility in terms of, in general, if it's just written into some sort of written learning plan, if there's been a plan for 24 hours of support, that can change sometimes, but really that should be communicated. You and your child should be involved in that conversation if support is going to change. And the kind of key thing is that the need is still there. So if they have sat down and the school have either applied, so different council areas deliver their PSA hours a bit differently. So if those hours have been directly allocated to your child or the school, can quite be helpful to ask how were those hours decided and who allocated them, because sometimes what you will find is that it's in general for a class rather than for an individual child, or that PSA might be providing support so the class teacher can spend more time with your child and it's a little bit more interlinked. But the bigger question is, well, if they've applied and everyone's discussed in a bigger conversation that your child needs this level of support, it's about, well, if that's not being provided, how else are they still meeting those individual needs? So even though the law isn't saying if everyone's, this is exactly what support looks like, if it has been recorded and there's been a conversation to say, your child needs someone there for their safety, to learn about these things, well, if that's not going to be through one-to-one, how else is that going to be offered and that need still met? Can be a really kind of important way to focus it on. If that support has been written into a CSP and it's written, then, you know, one of the routes that you do have around, if it's written into a CSP, is to actually kind of challenge that. There's a legal advice and support service called Let's Talk ASN. So a CSP is a legal document. So if that says there's 25 hours of support in place for your child, and that's through, you know, they define that as one-to-one delivery, you could kind of challenge what that, you know, if that isn't being delivered, what's happened around that. If it's written into a more general plan, firstly, that's still quite powerful. You know, if someone said that your child needs 25 hours of support, if that's not being delivered, there could also be seen as a failure to deliver that support. And that is something, certainly I would start by kind of going back to the school and saying, you know, we know this hasn't happened last year. What steps are going to be taken? And with one of those sorts of supports, I think getting a really clear written plan and having goals in that plan and regular review dates. So, you know, the reason that your child's getting 25 hours of PSA support should be because it's going to help them achieve this learning goal, you know, or develop in this area. So that's also a very good way to see if support isn't happening, because, you know, there should be a goal to that support being provided. And if it's not, you know, if you are having regular check-ins, it's going to become very evident that that support isn't being delivered, or the support that's in place isn't working. So it's probably a bit of firming up any written plans that are in place with review dates. If your child has a CSP or you think they might be eligible, making sure that has as much detail as possible and following up if it isn't delivered. And yeah, and again, if that doesn't move, there is options by going to the local authority with that, if things don't move forward. In terms of kind of general support and advice around those supports, really, if you feel that the school don't, you know, there's lots of kind of different lists of support, but also you can ask the school that, how do they feel they're meeting your child's needs? If they're not delivering that, how else and what else will be tried? And if they don't know, you know, there's lots of different places, Scottish Autism, you know, depending on your child's needs, who could maybe support and finding advice, but you don't have to provide all the answers there as well as the parent. You can ask the professionals also.
Yeah.
Yes.
It looks like we've just had a reply saying thanks very much. It's a really complex situation. So yeah.
Yeah.
So there's been a couple of questions around different authorities. So I think they've said here, sorry, the chat's just jumped as I was reading. So they're saying, similar to the question that you just answered, hours are paid for by a different authority. So they assume that this is individual support. But it's maybe just worth checking with the school exactly how that support is working and how that is being implemented in the school. And there was one here again about a different local authority saying
oh, sorry, I was just going to say, Lisa, on that as well, if the hours are being paid by the different local authority, and probably with some of these, the reason we kind of covered the home and host is because if you have any issues with the support that's being delivered, it's worth going. So when we say the local authority, and we have a big list that has all the contacts for each individual local authority, additional support for learning department, if your child isn't, if it's the home local authority, so a different local authority is paying for it, if you have any issues, they're the people to go to raise your concerns. Copy in maybe the council that your child's at, but where you're living, or the support the school is, but the actual kind of council to raise that with is saying, you know, I'm concerned my child's needs aren't being met, is with the kind of council paying those hours. It's just worth being aware. Sorry, I interrupted.
So that's helpful, because that kind of links into this one here that the person has asked as well, saying that they've got a 15-year-old who has 30 hours support paid by his local authority, and he lives in another area. And he's making course choices at the moment, and this, he's been informed that he may not be able to take some subjects as there won't be a support person to support him in some lessons. How is this when another local authority is paying the 30 hours?
Yeah. So I suppose the key thing there, I think, is a good question to ask. What exactly, as I said, it may depend on what the support looks like, because sometimes I think for quite a lot of young people, actually complete one-to-one PSA support might not be the right support for them. So it may depend what exactly is agreed about those hours. So firstly, focusing in on your young person's needs again. Well, it's like, well, what they need is this, you know, and this is why they have those support in place, you know, questioning that kind of that decision around that, but also the bigger question of there isn't kind of rights and equality issue there around what's kind of if it's to do with your child's support needs that they're not able to access those hours. There's a question about what's a reasonable adjustment, and is your child being included and supported equally around there. So I think probably that's a question to bring in the kind of school and kind of coordinator at sort of the other local authority level to set out very clearly, my child wishes to do these courses, and what we're being told is the barrier is that they wouldn't have the right support. What can be done about that? And asking. So the law does have what's called it's adequate and efficient support, which has to be provided. So the efficient can be a wee bit about cost in some circumstances, but what the law also says is cost can't be the primary consideration. So they have to look at a way to firstly support your child's needs. Obviously, with course choices, there is also always a bit of evening up. You know, the school have a timetable to run, and you know, if it's not, you know, sometimes there is difficulties around, you know, even with children who don't have additional support needs, that they can't take all the subjects that they wish to, but the school needs to be careful that it's not your child's additional support needs or their disability that are the barrier to them accessing that support, and that they have either made reasonable adjustments so they can access those exams, or they're still providing adequate and efficient support. And I think it's just about kind of going back to that conversation, and rather than it being about there's not the right support available, it's like, well, how are we meeting my child's individual needs? These are the wishes they have, and maybe putting that to the school and saying what's their suggestion for how they can access that. And if that's not working, actually going to the local authority and saying, well, this isn't enough support, or that something's not working in this picture that means that we're being told they're not able to access these exams or these courses.
Thanks, Hannah.
No.
We've had a question here that is around being out of school. So a child, and we're hearing, as I said before, quite a lot of that. And this is, well, it's due to it's bullying. So the child has been assaulted, and then they've tried to return to school, and then an incident has happened again. So it is, and now that anxiety, that we've got bad anxiety and we're struggling to attend school, there's been multiple meetings with the school, and they're still waiting to hear about a part-time table for her. So nothing's really happened yet. And she is out of school. So yeah, they've had meetings with the schools and also workers, but there's still just no further forward. So yeah, how can they, what could be put in place really?
Sounds really difficult. I'm really sorry to hear about that assault as well. And it sounds like, as well as, yeah, it just sounds like a really difficult time in school, and, you know, understandable that you're a young person struggling to get in around that. So I suppose, you know, the first thing kind of around that is certainly, you know, that sounds like a really serious incident, and there should certainly be, all schools should have bullying, anti-bullying policies. You know, if there's an assault, you know, there is options you can take around kind of looking at whether there's other ways you can raise that concern around the police. But in terms of, you know, the bullying side of things, the school should be taking actions around that bullying, and not just and looking at the impact amongst the other things that is having on your child as a support need in of itself. So even though, you know, your child's care experience and there might be needs that they have through that, the bullying is also an additional support need. So we get calls to the helpline just about bullying, or, you know, there's often other things, but bullying is an additional support need. And the key thing is the school should be viewing it as that, and looking at how to make sure your girl's protected and is included and feels safe at school while she's not able to attend. So this is, I think, yeah, what I was going to cover the beginning, is she still has a right to an education. So as long as your child is on the school roll, and I think that's probably important for kind of many of you to be aware of it, as long as they're on the school roll, they have a right to an education. So just because your young person can't get in the door of school doesn't mean that they're not entitled to an education and support with what they're learning at home. So as soon as the school's going to be aware that they're going to be off long term, they should be thinking about ways they can educate them. Now, again, the law doesn't say exactly what that education will look like at home, but it should be adequate. You know, it should allow them to build on their school education and allow them to develop their learning. So there's probably one question that while she's out of school, that she's getting access to support, and there's a conversation about education also, because if she's been out for a while, it sounds like there's going to be quite a bit of prior work needed in order for her to feel safe and supported to get back into the school environment at some point. And yeah, and as you said, for kind of contemplating returning due to her fears. And I suppose that might be one of the key things the school need to start with, is actually listening to your daughter's views, listening to your views, and starting on a plan to make sure she feels safe enough to learn at home, and then starting with looking at some creative approaches, certainly really reassuring her and having a clear plan for tackling the bullying and her safety, but also looking at what support's going to get her to the point that she can consider returning. With the part-time timetable, so what we always say is like the law doesn't say exactly how many hours of education a young person is entitled to, but obviously her peers and most children attend school for a certain number of hours, so it might be acceptable to have a part-time timetable in the short term, but it shouldn't be a long-term solution, because it's a flag that something is not working for your child at that school. So it's about is there a contemplation that something different needs to change if a young person's only coming in for longer term, a short period of time. So it should only be used with the goal of getting a child back into full-time learning, and when it's about their best interests, not about, oh well, we don't have the support in place. It should be that this has kind of clear benefit and goal for your daughter to get her back into school, and that it's supporting her with that. So what the part-time timetable, if that kind of feels like the right route, and you and your daughter feel that could be a way to get her back in, really focusing down on how long that will be or when it will be reviewed, but also what it will actually look like. Why do they feel a part-time timetable is going to help? Just from what you said, how is that going to help her? Is that going to resolve some of the safety and the experiences she's had? How is that actually going to work for her? And if the school don't know how to be supporting her with kind of feeling confident and safe in school again, do they need to seek advice? Does she need to, can they arrange some kind of counselling support or some way to kind of resolve the situation that she's been in? And if they're not sure, can they seek other support for what schools have done in other circumstances like this? So I suppose what I'm saying is I can't say exactly, how long the part-time timetable should be, but certainly it should be really focused on her individual needs and why it's going to work for her to get back in. And both that one and another one I said before with a 15-year-old, again, if they're within this kind of 12 to 15-year-old age group, there's also a right to advocacy. So at any time, you're always, whatever age your young person is, they have a right to be heard in decisions about their education, but there are some kind of specific access to advocacy, and sometimes where young people have been struggling to get into school, that can be quite a powerful right, because it can be about that conversation about your voice being heard, and how you can be involved in putting together that plan. But yeah, so I think with that one, probably going back to the school with why are we putting into place the part-time timetable, what's the plan, but also what's the education while she's struggling to attend, and how can this all be really based? So I think getting it right for every child, I'm sure you've all heard of that within the work you're doing anyway, but around asking, is my child, how is she going to feel safe, how is she going to feel included and heard and involved in learning? Those sort of what they call the Shinari indicators might be a good way to kind of look at her well-being together and work towards a plan to get back into school. Yeah, I hope that kind of covers it. Is there any more, had a wee bit of quieter on the questions there?
Yes. There's one here that I'm not sure whether it would be better for us for them to get in touch with us directly at the helpline. But I'll just say it out to you just now, just in case there's something we could give them. So 13-year-old has global developmental delay and wants to learn at home. She learns well at home, but the school have low expectations and do everything for her. They also refuse to evidence her learning within school. I'm happy for her to learn at home, but the TAC are not. So yeah.
Okay. Right. Sorry, I'm just reading it as well sometimes. One at home, but school, it looks. And that's really upsetting if you feel that the school have that low expectation of her in hearing. And that's one of the important thing is, your child's education should be, so the law says it's to develop to their fullest potential, and sometimes in that conversation, having that discussion, having that conversation, well, what do we all understand my child's fullest potential is? And if we don't know what that is there further assessments? How can we be working towards that? What is the fullest potential there? And also, what's her views on what she wants to learn, how she wants to develop? That might be where refuse to evidence her learning within school. So I'm not sure there if it's that you're looking to kind of home educate her or to kind of continue with her school meeting. It sounds like there's just a bit of a kind of bigger conflict around the understanding of her needs and kind of your views versus the schools. So I suppose there's a few different routes around that. So again, that's one where kind of an advocacy for your 13-year-old might be useful, and they will work with her in various different ways. Some young people want to be one-to-one, or some texts and things. So there's lots of different ways that advocacy can be involved to collect a young person's views, even if that needs to be in a different way from how you might think of advocacy usually. So we know that they can support young people who are non-verbal and things like that. So that might be a route around actually having that conversation about what she wants to learn. If she's saying that she wants to learn at home, that would actually reflect that view and take that into account. The other thing that it might be worth doing is, if there is any assessments, then kind of requesting a general assessment of her needs, because that might give a bit more information, or ask for educational psychology to be involved. Finally, if kind of sounds like if you're not agreeing with the TAC meeting, it might be worth putting in writing your concerns and your questions to the TAC. And then if you can't agree way forward, then kind of going to council level around that. One route might be, I mentioned before, additional support for learning mediation. And that's where if the school the parents or carers don't agree with the school or the local authority about the support picture, and it's sort of caused a kind of communication breakdown, that's where someone completely independent of the situation can get involved to facilitate agreeing a way forward. So that might be a route, but also it sounds like quite a complicated situation, and I've touched on a few different things. So again, with all of these, I know I'm kind of giving a few minutes run based on a very little bit of information. So if I haven't quite hit the point, or you've got any other questions, you are always welcome to drop us an email or give us a call to kind of cover things in more detail. So I noticed, you said about home educating. One thing to be aware of just with home education is it should be a positive choice to home educate. It should be that you want to home educate your child, not that you feel you have to, because there's not the right support in place for them. Also, if everyone agrees that it's in your child's the issue with, if you kind of formally request to home educate, is that the local authority no longer, you're kind of requesting them to have you're taking over responsibility for their education. So firstly, that might be a bit more difficult to navigate when you're a foster carer, but also it can remove some of your rights, or your child's rights to be entitled to support, so the kind of local authorities' duties around that. But the important thing is there's a difference between you choosing to home educate and everyone agreeing that a child's needs can be met at home, or the best place for that child is to learn at home for now. And if that's agreed by everyone, you shouldn't need to apply to home educate, and it would be kind of your right. They should still support that home education, so like giving you resources around that if everyone's in agreement. So there's a wee bit of a sort of difference there between formally home educating and actually everyone agreeing right now being educated at home and out of school is right for your young person. I hope that makes sense. We've run through quite a few questions. Was there any other we're missing? I'm just a wee bit conscious of time, but it's not the end of the world if we go over a bit. I couldn't see. I was just double checking there. Great. Well, just before, I know we've run over a bit. I really hope this session was helpful to you all. We'd really appreciate your feedback on today. So I've got Mohit's going to send an evaluation link, but you can also scan, if you're feeling high tech, scan that QR code out there and it'll take you to an evaluation. We just really appreciate your feedback around if this event worked for you, the time, anything you can think of. We we want to make sure that we're getting to yourselves as foster carers and getting the right information to you. And we know sometimes the helpline isn't always the right place to go for that, and we can be quite busy. So you're always welcome to get in contact with us via the helpline and email, but we also want to make sure there's also other ways that you can get our advice. So if you do have time to do that evaluation, that would be wonderful. We will also send you a wee follow-up email with the links that we've mentioned today, a link to our evaluation if you don't get time to do it, and an attachment of this PowerPoint so that you've got that to look at. And anything else? I think that's the main things to cover. But thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. I really hope you found it helpful, and please just let us know if you have any kind of comments, suggestions, or feedback. But yeah, I hope everyone has a lovely rest of their morning. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.